back to another episode of Commentator's Corner. I am Tyler Reedy. That's Brendan Preisman. And today we got a big day, Brendan. We've been waiting for this one. Finally get to talk deeply about the NFL.
Been waiting for this for a long time, and we both have a lot of strong some of those before, whether over the podcast or just in general. But now we finally get to talk about the NFL and only about the NFL. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so 25 minutes interrupted about the National Football League. It's at the midway point in the season, and I've been hearing a lot of things about just the way the season's gone, and there were some COVID-19 issues at the beginning of the year with various teams, but things have kind of settled down, and the protocols have been working, and there have been a lot of crazy comebacks, a lot of big-name teams making a lot of noise with teams like Kansas City, teams like Pittsburgh being the only undefeated team left, and a lot of surprising teams too. A lot of mix-up. Not a lot of traditional teams might be making the playoffs this year, so we could see a lot of different things in the second half of the season like we have in the first half. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it certainly has. And you mentioned the COVID issues. I think there was only one or two games that got postponed, which is really big for the NFL, because when baseball started spring, there was a game being canceled every other day. But the NFL, they've mostly gotten past the virus. There hasn't been a lot of bad stuff happening for anybody. So it looks like they're well on their way to a successful season, and we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, so halfway point of the year, and on paper, the best team is the Pittsburgh Steelers, 8-0 record, only remaining undefeated team in the league. And then right behind them in the AFC is Kansas City, defending Super Bowl champions. As you see them right behind me, they're 8-1. And the general consensus, even though the Chiefs aren't undefeated, Pittsburgh is undefeated, the general consensus is that Kansas City is the best team in the league. Would you agree with that? And then if they are, who can beat them?
I think I kind of have to agree with that after the horrid. Sorry about that. I think I would have to agree with the fact that the Chiefs are the best team in the league. Maybe my phone falling is God telling me, no.
I hope not.
But I think it is the Chiefs after that horrible performance that they put on against the Cowboys yesterday. If you almost lose to Garrett Gilbert, a guy whose best career highlights are A, losing Texas the 2010 national title game to Alabama, which I'm still not over, and B, the AAF, the so-called class of the NFL, then the class of the NFL has a lot of issues. Now, Ben Roethlisberger's having a nice resurgent season, but I don't think that the Steelers are the team to beat. I do think right now it is the Chiefs, and for your question, who could beat them? Honestly, I don't really see now that could beat them unless some issues worked out. Like Seattle would probably give up 70 because their defense is non-existent. New Orleans, I don't know if Drew Brees can outplay Patrick Mahomes at this point. And for Tampa Bay, we know that Tom Brady can't outplay Patrick Mahomes after that last night. Green Bay or Baltimore, I'd say, or maybe even Tennessee.
Yeah,
those are the
Green
three teams
Bay.
that I think.
I was thinking about this last night after we got through all the games yesterday, talking about Sunday. But I was thinking about Green Bay as well because they've got the consistent playmakers that a lot of other teams don't have. When you look at a team like Baltimore, they have the reigning MVP with Lamar Jackson, but he's just not putting up the same numbers this year. That offense just doesn't have as much of an explosive factor anymore. But Green Bay, aside from that one outlier with the Tampa Bay game, the blowout loss, I mean, that's going to happen to every team, basically. But they've got consistent playmakers. Aaron Rodgers can put up some unbelievable games, especially late in the year in the playoffs. And then Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, wide receiver and running back, both having great years. So I think they're a team that can not only put up a similar amount of points that Kansas City's offense will put up, but their defense is all right, too. I mean, they've got good outside pass rushers with Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith to get to Patrick Mahomes. And as we saw with the 49ers in the Super Bowl last year that caused a little bit of trouble early on, and then on the back end, Jair Alexander, Adrian Amos, maybe they can slightly contain the very talented Kansas City receivers, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's any team that can beat Kansas City, I would think it's Green Bay.
Yeah, and the X factor, of course, would be a couple times where Rodgers just sees either a real slight or a perceived one against him, and he just goes and balls out. For this year, I think it would be the Packers deciding to take Jordan Love and A.J. Dillon with their first-round draft picks, despite the Packers already being set at those positions, quarterback and running back, respectively. Like, oh, you're drafting my replacement? How about I throw for over 2,200 yards with a 24-2 touchdown interception ratio over the first half of the season?
Yeah, angry Aaron Rodgers. We've seen it before. 2014, 2016, both years where the Packers were kind of being counted out of the playoff race due to tough starts. And as soon as Aaron Rodgers heard those rumblings, he kicked it into another gear. So he's been doing that this year, but he's definitely going to have to keep it up if he wants to, at the very least, make it to the Super Bowl and match up with Kansas City. But generally, the AFC seems to be the better conference than the NFC this year. There's a lot of potential wild card teams kind of floating around. The NFC, especially with the NFC East weighing it down, has really struggled to produce a lot of good teams.
Mm-hmm.
But AFC, Kansas City's going to win the West. We know that. That's pretty clear, unless they have some kind of monumental.
We don't sure.
Well, it's going to take an injury or some kind of monumental collapse. So,
were the Chiefs injured in their game against the Raiders earlier this year?
No, not really, but they only play the Raiders one more time. And the schedule is quite easy the rest of the year, aside from New Orleans and Tampa Bay. But in the AFC North, it's going to be between Pittsburgh and Baltimore. Pittsburgh has the upper hand with the 8-0 record and the first head-to-head win over Baltimore a couple weeks ago. So looks like Pittsburgh should be able to hold that division unless they keep playing like they did this past week against Dallas. Then AFC East, Buffalo is really the only high-end team left in that division. Miami's making some noise in second place, but New England's not good this year. The Jets are 0-8. They're winning the race for Trevor Lawrence in the first draft pick of next year. And then AFC South, Tennessee's got a decent-sized lead going there. Indianapolis is hot on their tails, and then it's a big drop-off to Houston and Jacksonville. So what do you make of the division races in the AFC this year?
About the Texans, I must say, it wouldn't be a drop-off if they hadn't had the hardest schedule in human history to start off.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about the Dolphins, who you mentioned is making some noise. I think that they could contend for either the potential second wild card spot after whoever isn't the division winner of the AFC North, or potentially even a division title, because their schedule the rest of the way looks fairly light. Next week, they've got the Chargers, then the Jets, then the Bengals. They're already on a 4-game win streak right now, so that's another 4 games right there. Then Kansas City. That's going to be a tough game. New England, I think, is winnable. Against the Raiders, that's also winnable. And Buffalo, I think that they could beat the Bills.
Yeah, so talking about Miami.
I do agree with
you. Go ahead.
Currently, Buffalo has the edge in that.
Yeah, Buffalo definitely has the edge, but talking about Miami, they got off to a decent start to the year. They were about, I think it was 3-3, maybe 4-3, and they were on a hot streak when they made what many considered to be an inexplicable decision to make a quarterback change from veteran Ryan Fitzpatrick, who was playing well, to rookie 5th overall draft choice Tua Tagovailoa. And Tua just went to Arizona and beat the Cardinals, a team that is a playoff team, maybe even an NFC West division winner candidate. But Tua just outdueled Kyler Murray this past week, so Miami's legit. They're picking up some big wins, beat the Rams pretty hard with their defense a couple weeks ago, and then the big one against Arizona this past week. So I think they're definitely a threat.
I do think that right now for the Coach of the Year award, it's Brian Flores, and he's in a class of his own. He's taken this team from last year at the start of the year. People were like, oh, this is the worst team in the history of ever. They could go 0-16. And he somehow got them to 5. management kept him around, and this year he's already tied that 5-win total with a lot more to come, in my opinion. So the Dolphins are definitely a team to watch out for.
Yeah, so we'll see if they can make it to a wild card spot. Wild card spots are highly contended right now in the AFC. Of course, you got Miami at 5-3. Las Vegas Raiders, the only team that's beaten Kansas City, they're also at 5-3. Baltimore 6-2, Cleveland 5-3, and then Indianapolis at 5-3. So you got 6 teams there that are, or actually 5 teams there that are potential wild card spot candidates, and only 3 spots available. So it's definitely going to be a close race to the finish.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting season. But if I had to pick the wild card spots, obviously the 5 seed in the AFC would be whoever doesn't win the AFC North, whether that's Pittsburgh or Baltimore. Right now, it's leaning towards Baltimore because of the 2 losses. Pittsburgh undefeated. Mm-hmm. And then I do think it goes to Miami because their schedule the rest of the way is one where you could say, oh, they might finish the year 11-5, and you wouldn't get laughed out of the room because they've been competitive in almost every game they've played. Their worst loss this year is actually to the Patriots in Week 1, wow. That 21-11. But they've been competitive with teams like the Seahawks. They've beaten the Cardinals. So I think that Miami will take the 6th seed, and then for that new 7th spot, I think I'm going to have to give it to the Las Vegas Raiders just ahead of the Browns and the Colts for a few simple reasons. I trust Derek, and I trust Baker Mayfield and Phillip Rivers.
You really trust Baker Mayfield? That's interesting because...
No, I don't. Baker Mayfield.
Oh, you don't? Okay. Yeah. Misheard you. My bad.
Yeah, I don't think the Browns are going to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
They're going to be very close, but they're not going to.
Yeah. So, I would trust Derek Carr as well. I think Vegas has been the most consistent team out of those 3. Cleveland went to Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago and got absolutely walloped. I think it was 38-7. So, you got to question, can this offense produce when their high talent run game is taken away from them? And then Indianapolis.
Especially.
Go ahead.
When you're talking about Cleveland, especially if you can junior, there's definitely a lot there that the team might struggle with.
Yeah, and then Indianapolis, the other team that you kicked out of the AFC wildcard spot, they only put up 10 points this past week against Baltimore, which has been a somewhat exploitable defense this year. There have been teams that have put up solid numbers against it, but Indianapolis just completely looked lost on offense yesterday. But turning it over to the NFC side of things, division races, they're fairly tight. There are 2 good teams, maybe even more in all of them. In the West, Seattle is 6-2, Arizona's 5-3, Rams are 5-3, 49ers are 4-5, arguably the best division in football. NFC North, Green Bay is 6-2, Chicago's 5-4. Chicago's a team that a lot of people are thinking maybe is a fraud because of their easy early schedule, but they're a game behind the Packers, a game and a half actually, so could be interesting there. New Orleans is 6-2, Tampa Bay is 6-3. They just went head to head this past week, and New Orleans whooped them. And then in the NFC East, the worst division we have seen in quite some time, with Philadelphia at 3-4-1, Washington at 2-6, and then Dallas and the New York Giants each at 2-7. So, what do you think about the NFC side?
Well, first of all, going back to the NFC East, I made a list of teams that I thought were in the race for Trevor Lawrence. I included 6 teams on that list. 3 of them were from the NFC East, and none of the 3 are out of the division race yet.
Wow, yeah.
So that should show you something. But for the NFC, I really think it's going to be interesting because, unlike in the AFC, 2 teams that are the class of the class of the conference in Kansas City and Pittsburgh. For the NFC, except for Green Bay, as we went over a little earlier, each team that could make it out has a lot of flaws. Like even Green Bay, we saw with that fluke win that game earlier in the season. If Aaron Rodgers plays that badly, there's no way they can win. And with New Orleans, you've got offensive struggles. Drew Brees, clearly not what he once was throwing the ball. Seattle, you've got the poorest defense that can't stop giving up more than 30. Philadelphia is in the NFC East. Tampa Bay can't really seem to get some offensive consistency going from week to week. Arizona, their problem, much like Seattle's, is defense. Los Angeles, offensive problems. Chicago, offensive problems. And San Francisco, despite being 4-5, they're not really a 4-5 team. They've just had half their locker room injured, basically. I think that if all the teams are healthy and on an equal playing field, San Francisco might be the second or third best team in the division or in the conference.
Yeah, you're right. They have been very beaten up this whole season, but the thing I really want to ask you about with this conference, especially with the way things just played out on Sunday Night Football the other night, is New Orleans and Tampa Bay, because leading up to this past week, everybody thought Tampa Bay is the best team in this division. They've got Tom Brady. They've got an extremely talented offense with Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, a wide receiver, Rob Gronkowski, a tight end, a whole plethora of running backs, and now Antonio Brown being added as a wide receiver. But they went on Sunday Night Football last night at home against their division rival New Orleans and got creamed by the Saints for the second time really this year. So what do you make of that division race, and who do you think is going to come out on top?
I think that after that game, it's the Saints that really have to come out because they've got technically it's only a half game lead, but really it's a 1.5 game lead considering they have now beaten the Buccaneers tiebreaker in that division. I think it's the Saints, but again, I struggle with saying that they're a good team. They struggled with the Lions, the Chargers, the Panthers, the Bears. They've still got the 49ers, Chiefs on their schedule. So I think they're going to come out of it, but I don't think the NFC South is as good as Saints or Buccaneers fans would have you believe.
Yeah, Saints haven't been playing their best football, as you mentioned, but they've got a 5-game win streak going now after last night. So that's the longest win streak in the entire NFC. So we'll see if the Saints can keep things rolling. They're done with Tampa Bay for the rest of the year. So we'll see if Brady can bounce back. It's definitely going to be a tight race in that division, certainly in the NFC West. And then the NFC East, that division's a mess. How do you see that playing out?
I think the Eagles are going to win it by default, but it's the same way that the Eagles win it by default if I was in a cross-country race and the starter somehow shot every for me. Like, I'd win, but
yeah,
not really.
Yeah.
I do think that one team that could make a late push, though, is the Vikings. They had a rough game against the Falcons a few weeks ago, but they came back, beat the Packers at the start of this month, beat the Lions, and their schedule the rest of the way. Their toughest team left is either the Saints or the Buccaneers. They play the Bears, the Cowboys, the Panthers, the Jaguars, the Buccaneers, the Bears, the Saints, and the Lions. Like, all of those are winnable games. The Vikings could theoretically win out this season. I don't think they're going to. They could definitely contend for that final wild card spot with a team from like the NFC West.
Yeah, but the clock is ticking for Minnesota. 3-5 record. They can really only afford 2 more losses, but they are playing much, much better football, and it's because Dalvin Cook is absolutely cooking opposing defenses. 4 touchdowns last week against Green Bay, and then over 200 rushing yards against Detroit this past week. So if he can keep his success going, and then you got Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson as 2 good options at wide receiver on the outside, who knows? Maybe Minnesota can make some noise. But let's talk about the awards races for individual players, because there are some tight ones. MVP, Patrick Mahomes is the defending MVP, but might not hold it this year. That's what a lot of people think, including yourself.
Yeah, I don't think it's really possible for Mahomes to hold it just because of the type of season Russell Wilson is having. In their games so far this season, the Seahawks have scored 38, 35, 38, 31, 37, and 34. So Wilson has just been absolutely incredible all year, and he's really had to be because the team's defense has been atrocious, as we've mentioned a couple of times. But Wilson has more touchdowns than him, and I think that narrative is also part of narrative's always a part of some MVP awards. Last year it was Lamar Jackson tearing up the league. The year before that it was Patrick Mahomes tearing up the league. This year it's Russell Wilson, who has had some great seasons before, is having his greatest season yet. Deserves this. So I think it's going to go to Wilson. I think Mahomes will probably finish second, but I don't think it's a bad second for Mahomes.
Yeah, and I mean, adding on to what you said, obviously Russell Wilson is the guy right now in Seattle, but Patrick Mahomes, he's got so much talent around him. You know, he really doesn't need to do that much. We saw a couple weeks ago in the Denver game, I think he only had 200 yards, one passing touchdown, and the Chiefs won by 3 touchdowns or something like that. So with the talent Mahomes has around him, you know, he doesn't need to put up crazy numbers, MVP-like numbers, to get his team wins. So I would take Russell Wilson as well at this point.
But one of the things with Mahomes,
Go ahead.
he still kind of is putting the stat yesterday, fastest quarterback to 100 passing touchdowns. Did it in just 40 games, which is absolutely incredible. And Dan Marino lost 2 records, actually, last week. Lamar Jackson broke his record for best record over first 30 games as a starting quarterback, going 25-5 since he took over that year ago. So shout outs to both of those guys. The NFL is in some great hands for the next decade and a half, I think.
Yeah, and the 2 guys you mentioned, Mahomes and Jackson, the last 2 NFL MVPs. So they'll be up there for sure again this year, but Russell Wilson clearly seems to be at the top. Offensive Player of the Year, you know, sometimes they give it to the same guy that wins MVP, sometimes they don't. Let's just assume that they don't give it to Russell Wilson, the guy that we're choosing. So who do you think are the contenders for Offensive Player of the Year? Because Dalvin Cook is starting to put himself out there at running back.
Right now I still think it's Derrick Henry, just because he's been the leader of the Titans team that is looking even better than they were last year. I do think Dalvin race, he's definitely top 3 now. I think Mahomes is obviously there because a lot of times you see the Offensive Player of the Year award used as a consolation prize for whoever didn't get the MVP. So Mahomes is up there. Aaron Rodgers, Josh Allen, 2 quarterbacks having some good seasons. They're both up there as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned Derrick Henry as a top running back candidate. Dalvin Cook has actually overtaken him for the lead in rushing yards. It's Cook and Henry, and then there's this 300-yard drop-off to the next guy, Josh Jacobs. But Dalvin Cook, I think his chances are probably contingent on the Vikings making the playoffs, which is a pretty good long shot at this point. But Dalvin Cook, with the way he's going right now, he could probably write a similar narrative to what we saw last year with Derrick Henry, where he just carries the team on his back into the playoffs and then maybe a couple games deep. But Tennessee's in a good spot to make the playoffs, which is why I think I'd give the edge to Derrick Henry as well. But Josh Allen, as you mentioned, just had a monster game against the Seahawks, one of the top teams in the entire league. If he can keep it going, he had a cold streak for a few games, but if Josh Allen can keep it going, especially with his passing production, something people have questioned the last few years, he's definitely a top-tier candidate.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, so moving on to Rookie of the Year. Offensive side, you've got really a 2-horse race at this point between the first overall pick, Joe Burrow, and then another top 10 pick, Justin Herbert, quarterbacks for the Cincinnati Bengals, Los Angeles Chargers, respectively. Joe Burrow's the guy that's on pace to break all the records this year, but Justin Herbert's hot. He's been playing really good football, been consistent as well, a lot of multi-touchdown games, but the common theme with both those quarterbacks is that they just haven't been able to win the close games. They've been putting up really, really solid numbers, but they haven't been able to really come through when it's mattered most.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes that issue isn't really on the quarterbacks. For Herbert, his problem is that he's on the Chargers, and that franchise is somehow cursed. I don't know what Phillip Rivers did back in 2004, but something happened it impossible to win close games. Like I remember seeing a stat a couple days ago, like, oh, this Chargers team is almost as unlucky as the one that led the NFL in total offense and defense in 2010 and missed the playoffs. Because that is a thing that happened. They went 9-7 because they couldn't close out a game and they couldn't play on special teams in 2010. But I also think has a really leaky defense on his side, so that doesn't help. But I think Burrow has the slight edge because, as you mentioned, he's the one breaking the records. And going back to my narrative idea, I do think that if you have a narrative on your side, whether it's you're breaking records or you're due for an, that because of the records Burrow's breaking, he's going to get the Offensive Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, I hesitate a little bit on that because of the competition that Joe Burrow's got within his division. We've seen him take on Baltimore once, one of the top defenses in the league, and he got absolutely destroyed by that Ravens defense. Several turnovers, only I think 100 passing yards, and he's still got to play Pittsburgh twice. He's still got to play Baltimore again at home. So I don't know if he's going to be able to put the same numbers that Herbert's been putting up in recent games because Herbert definitely has a much easier schedule. Miami, the Jets, New England's on there, Atlanta, Raiders, Broncos, Chiefs. Not really the kind of defenses that Joe Burrow is going to have to face in that really difficult AFC North. So I'm actually giving the edge to Justin Herbert, but it'll be fun to see how it plays out. They're both going to have strong second halves, you know that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just about it for this episode as we finally got to talk about the NFL. It's been quite the first half of the season, and it's going to be fun to see how it plays out. As I mentioned at the top, could have a lot of new teams in the playoff hunt and making the playoffs. But just to wrap it up real quick, way too early Super Bowl prediction. What do you think, Brendan?
Okay. I got a Super Bowl prediction and also a flaming hot take that you're either going to really love or kick me out of the Zoom.
Right,
the Super Bowl prediction, I think at this point it's Chiefs Packers. Those are the two teams that I think have the highest upside on both offense and defense, and those two teams that I think are going to get the job done. All right. And my flaming hot take, the Texans will finish no lower than ninth in the AFC and might make the playoff.
Ooh, really?
Here is why.
That's interesting.
This is their schedule for the rest of the year. Browns, Patriots, Lions, Colts, Bears, Colts, Bengals, Titans.
Yeah, but
I don't see a game on there that isn't winnable.
Yeah, but they almost just lost a game to a backup quarterback-led Jacksonville Jaguars team. Like, what do you have to say to that?
Don't count out the Jaguars and Pac-12 quarterbacks, man. But they nearly beat the Titans in overtime. They almost beat the Steelers. And they were competitive with the Chiefs for a little bit. So 10-6 isn't that far out of the realm of possibility. That's all I'm saying.
I don't know. I don't trust that defense at all in Houston. They've been torched by Minnesota. They've been torched by Green Bay. They've been torched by Tennessee. They've been torched by just about everybody. And yeah, I know Deshaun Watson can make any team competitive, but I just don't know if it's enough, especially with David Johnson starting to get hurt a little bit. I don't know.
That's why it's a flaming hot take.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll see how
it
goes.
Do you have one?
What'd you say?
Do you have a flaming hot take?
I don't know if Miami making the playoffs is that much of a hot take anymore. I feel like, I don't know, is Kyler Murray winning MVP a hot take, you think?
Yeah,
because
I see it happen.
The way I've seen that Arizona offense develop the last few weeks, I think early on in the season, they were really trying to force the ball a lot to DeAndre Hopkins and run the ball a lot with Kenyon Drake. And yeah, that worked for a little bit, but when they ran into a couple teams like Carolina and the Jets a little bit, they got shut down. But now Kyler Murray's really starting to just take over that offense, throw the ball to whoever he wants to, run the ball whenever he wants to. Had a massive game yesterday. And then, Russell Wilson, yeah, he's still putting up big numbers, but just got blown out by Buffalo. I don't know. It's a hot take for a reason, but Kyler Murray, the numbers he's putting up both on the ground and through the air, we'll see how it
I
goes.
think
He's got the weapons around him and maybe the defense too. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
I think it's doable if and only if the Cardinals win the NFC West.
Yeah.
If they do that, I think Kyler Murray gets the MVP.
Yeah, Murray already outdueled Russell Wilson a couple weeks ago in that Sunday night football game, Cardinals Seahawks. So we'll see how it goes. It's going to be a fun race. Those are maybe the two most fun quarterbacks to watch at this point in the NFC. Of course, you have Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen on the other side, but it's going to be a fun second half to the season, and we'll make sure to keep you covered on all of it. Basketball season will be starting up for prep soon, and we'll have you covered for sure. So, Brendan, it'll be exciting. I know I can't wait.
Yep, neither can I.
Yep, so we'd like to thank you for joining us for another episode of Commentator's Corner. Hopefully you stay safe out there at tough times with COVID-19, but hopefully you can stay safe and hopefully you enjoy yourself until we see you next time. So for Brendan Preisman, I'm Tyler Reedy saying thank you for joining us and see you next week.